texts that make me wonder. I think I might have an explanation. I'm always asked to preach when the pastor is going to be out of town. Jesus' genealogy fell in a series of sermons on Advent, a time when pastors sometimes leave town. This one was originally in a series on hope, could have been in Advent again. I wonder if Tim or Bert or whoever I was standing in for looked at these texts and said to their wives, "Hey, aren't we supposed to visit your folks sometime soon? I'll ask him to do this. He never says no." Just a thought, pointing the fingers. And in fact, here, when I've spoken, I've been given free rein. Preach on whatever you want to. Okay, Lamentations. These are funerary songs. The Hebrew title comes from the first word of 3 of the chapters. The word that begins this type of a song, and many of the laments in the Bible. Eicha. Chapter 1. How lonely sits the city that once was full of people. How like a widow she has become. She that was great among the nations. She that was a princess among the provinces has become a vassal. Chapter 2. How the Lord in his anger has humiliated the daughter of Zion. He has thrown down from heaven the splendor of Israel. He has not remembered his footstool in the day of his anger. Chapter 4. How the gold has grown dim. How the pure gold is changed. The sacred stones lie scattered at the head of every street. Eicha is an emphatic word. Not just the city sits lonely, but how lonely the city sits. We translate it with how, but that isn't really emphatic enough. Maybe we should add something like incredibly. How incredibly lonely the city sits. How the Lord in his anger has utterly humiliated the daughter of Zion. This is the language of lament. Pretty dark stuff. But this was a dark time. Jerusalem, God's city, had just fallen to the Babylonians. Jeremiah, who is thought to be the author of Lamentations, received messages from God for King Jehoiakim. Then he had Baruch, his scribe, write them down, and since he was banished from the court, he would have Baruch deliver them to the king's court. On one such occasion, the king's advisors thought he should really hear this message. And when they told him, the king sent for the scroll and had it read aloud. As Yehudi read, after 3 or 4 columns, the king took a knife and cut the scroll and tossed the piece into the fire. Quite a demonstration of contempt for a message from God. And Jerusalem fell hard. Most of the population had been carted off to Babylon. We remember Psalm 137. By the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung up our lyres, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How shall we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? If I forget you, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither. Let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth, if I do not remember you, if I do not set Jerusalem above my highest joy. Remember, O Lord, against the Edomites, the day of Jerusalem, how they said, raise it down to its foundations. O daughter of Babylon, you devastator. Happy shall he be who requites you with what you have done to us. Happy shall he be who takes your little ones and dashes them against the rocks. Again, pretty dark stuff. This psalm was from the same dark time, only from the perspective of those who were in exile. Our text was written for those who were left behind, those still in Jerusalem, where this one stone was not left standing on another. Here they were in Jerusalem, God's footstool, conquered, left with the rubble. What do we do now? The preceding verses of chapter 3 bring up all the great things God did for Israel and show how that is no longer the case. All the wonderful images about being the people of God are turned upside down. He has brought me into darkness, not into light. His hand is against me all the day. He has made my paths crooked. He has made me desolate. He has made me the object of derision. He has bent his bow, and I am the target. Wow. Now, make no mistake. The writer is not saying that God is acting on a whim. No. Israel entered into political alliances that were not compatible with life as the chosen people of God. In chapter 1, we have the confession. My sins have been bound into a yoke. By his hands they were woven together. They have been hung on my neck, and the Lord has sapped my strength. He has given me into the hands of those I cannot withstand. The Lord is righteous, yet I rebelled against his command. Listen, all you peoples. Look on my suffering. I called to my allies, but they betrayed me. In my heart I am disturbed, for I have been most rebellious. We screwed up, Israel. God has called us to account. In my first Hebrew class at Wisconsin, our instructor would read us Psalm 13 and Psalm 15 in Hebrew each day to begin class. Our assignment was to be able to recite one of these in Hebrew at the end of the semester. We practiced on our own, of course, but Paul felt it important for us to hear it on a regular basis. Psalm 13 is a lament. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I bear pain in my soul and have sorrow in my heart all the day? How long shall my enemy be exalted over me? Consider and answer me, O Lord my God. Enlighten my eyes, lest I sleep the sleep of death. Lest my enemies say, I have prevailed over him. Lest my foes rejoice, because I am shaken. The language and form are very similar. The Hebrews didn't mess around when it came to lament. In fact, they didn't mess around when it came to any expression of emotion to God. They were very free about sharing pain, disappointment, frustration, and anger with God. But they were equally as free about expressing happiness, relief, gratitude, joy, and hope. I have said from the pulpit before, maybe this one, that many of the stories we find in our scriptures point out that the Hebrews, and by extension us, we believe a little differently. When you read stories about the Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Babylonian pantheons, the religions of the surrounding cultures, you find stories of capricious gods, whose favor could be won and lost, who often fought among themselves, who could be tricked and stolen from and swayed. The relationship of the Greeks and Romans with their deities was a tenuous one. Those who were not brazen enough to try to trick or steal from the gods were afraid of them. The gods and goddesses could suddenly decide they had had enough. They could change their minds on a whim. There doesn't seem to be any element of trust. The Hebrews trusted their God to do what he said he would do, punish them if they disobeyed, deliver them from their enemies, but mostly to love them in all situations. When they succeeded and when they failed, as they often did, as we all often do. So why was this a text from a book of funerary songs included in a series of Sunday messages given to the topic of hope? Because hope always springs up. Our call to worship this morning comes from Alexander Pope's An Essay on Man, Epistle 1. Hope springs eternal in the human breast. Man never is, but always to be blessed. The soul, uneasy and confined from home, rests and expatiates in a life to come. I had to look at it. Expatiate means to wander freely, not to be confused with expatriate, which means to banish or exile. The Essay on Man is a philosophical poem written in heroic couplets. And it was published in the early 1700s. Pope was attempting to show man's place in the universe. It challenges as prideful a people-centered worldview. The poem is not solely Christian, but it makes an assumption that man has fallen and must seek salvation. Pope says that no matter how imperfect, complex, and disturbing the universe appears to be, it functions in a rational way according to the natural laws. The natural laws consider the universe as a whole, a perfect work of God. To humans, it appears to be evil and imperfect in many ways, but Pope points out that this is because of our limited mindset and limited intellectual capacity. It's an affirmative poem of faith. Life seems to be chaotic and confusing to man when he is in the center of it, but according to Pope, it's really divinely ordered. In Pope's world, God exists as the center of the universe. The limited intelligence of mankind can only take in so much of this, so humanity must rely on hope, which then leads to faith. Man must be aware of his existence in the universe and what he brings to it. It is the duty of humanity to try to do good, regardless of other situations. This is the message Pope is trying to get across to the reader. Hope springs eternal. Is it true? Does hope spring eternal in humans? We hear of hope all the time. It permeates our everyday speech and our culture. Think it will rain? I hope so, the crops need it. Or, I hope not, we have a picnic planned. Think it will snow. I hope not, I have to drive to Columbus. Or, I hope so, I want a snow day. I sure hope the tribal council votes that creep off the island. I hope the Bachelor picks her, she's incredible. In comics, background stories exist for the characters to give the message that hope lives on. One day, maybe not tomorrow, maybe not next week, maybe not in our lifetimes, but one day, as long as there is one man, justice will prevail. It's a foregone conclusion. It's a common message given by fiction and folklore. Only the most downer of downer endings excludes it, and even then, there's usually some way around such a bleak finish, no matter how bad things are. Emily Dickinson wrote a poem about hope. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard. And sore must be the storm that could have bashed the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea. Yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. G.K. Chesterton wrote, fairy tales are more than true. Not because they tell us that dragons exist, but because they tell us that dragons can be beaten. In music, Bob Dylan's To Make You Feel My Love is sung from the point of a man who is in love with a woman whose life has treated her harshly, and who has had especially bad luck when it comes to romantic relationships. The lyrics gently tell her to never give up hope, because there's still someone who loves her. The storms are raging on a rolling sea, down the highway of regret. The winds of change are blowing wild and free, but you ain't seen nothing like me yet. Garth Brooks' song, The Change, is about doing the right thing and never giving up. Ever. Or else evil, sadness, and hatred win. As long as one heart still holds on, then hope is never really gone. In real life, every participant of any ideologically motivated resistance movement against an occupying power feels hope at times, or even constantly, or to the bitter end. Even when almost all hope seems lost, people will remember or imagine society in accordance with that ideology and draw their strength from that vision. Those 30-something idealists at the end of the 17th or the 18th century, named Washington, Jefferson, and Revere, they had hope. That tall, gangly lawyer from Illinois felt it. Countless slaves in the South felt it. The Kennedy brothers and Dr. King felt it in the 60s. People in Ukraine feel it. In film, Independence Day. Most of the major cities on planet Earth have been wiped out. And all attempts at attacking the aliens have failed so far. But there are still planes and still pilots to fly them. And besides, it's the 4th of July. The tagline for Deep Impact was, "Oceans rise, cities fall, hope survives." In Finding Nemo, after they have escaped from a hungry shark and massive minefield explosions, Marlin and Dory are exhausted. Marlin is anxious to find his missing son, Nemo, but now he has lost the best clue for finding him, a scuba mask inscribed with the address of the diver who captured Nemo. Dory helps Marlin find hope. Discouraged, Marlin says, "That was my only chance at finding my son. Now it's gone." But Dory is not so easily deterred. "Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills," she says, "when life gets you down, you know what you gotta do. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming. Just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim. Swim." Hope is what sustains Andy Dufresne after his false conviction and incarceration in the Shawshank Redemption. He and Red even get into an argument over having hope in prison, with Andy saying it's necessary, and Red saying that it's dangerous. Eventually, Red comes to Andy's point of view. Andy writes to him in a letter, "Remember, Red, hope is a good thing, maybe the best of things, and no good thing ever dies." At the end of the Star Wars prequels, the Emperor has taken power. The Jedi Order is destroyed. Yoda and Obi-Wan have been driven into hiding, and the Republic has been turned into the oppressive Galactic Empire. But the Alliance has begun. And the Skywalker twins have been hidden from Darth Vader. And they both will become a new hope. Where does it come from, hope? Mythology tells us the story of Pandora. In classical Greek mythology, Pandora was the first woman on Earth. Zeus ordered Hephaestus, the god of craftsmanship, to create her, so he did, using earth and water. The gods endowed her with many gifts. Athena clothed her, Aphrodite gave her beauty, and Hermes gave her speech. Pandora was also given a beautiful container with instructions not to open it under any circumstance. Impelled by her curiosity, given to her by the gods, Pandora opened it, and all evil and pestilence contained in the box escaped and spread over the earth. She hastened to close the container, but the whole contents had escaped. Pandora was deeply saddened by what she had done. The version I heard, and there are many, said that when everything had escaped, she snapped the box closed again, but heard a voice begging to be let out. Fearful of what else she might let loose on the world, she initially refused, but the one thing that remained in the box was the spirit of hope. And hope explained to Pandora that unless she too was let out, the world would be lost. So hope was unleashed on creation. But in the Bible, we find hope existing where we least expect it. In the middle of despair, character after character finds hope living in the depths of their being. Abraham hopes. Sarah laughs at first, but finds hope realized in Isaac. Joseph, sold into slavery by his brothers, falsely accused and imprisoned, never stops hoping. And all his wormwood and gall ends up saving his family. David the armor bearer finds hope and uses the gifts God gave him to deliver Israel from the Philistines. We also hear it in the lament I read earlier, Psalm 13. Remember how it begins. How long, O Lord, will you forget me forever? How long will you hide your face from me? But it ends like this. But I have trusted in your steadfast love. My heart shall rejoice in your salvation. I will sing to the Lord, because he has dealt bountifully with me. Even in the depths of despair, the psalmist remembered, and he had hope. And it's in our text for today. These verses are the transition between lament and praise, between despair and faith, and the transitions are the pivotal moments in folklore, in literature, in song, in history, in film, and in our lives. Watch for them. Remember my affliction and my bitterness, the wormwood and the gall. My soul continually remembers it and is bowed down within me. But this I remember, and therefore I have hope. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never end. They are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore I will hope in him. Remember my affliction. Remember the bitterness and poison. My soul remembers that my soul is doubled over. But this I remember, and I have hope. The rest of the chapter is spent talking about how life is when spent in covenant with God. Remember, we experience faith a little differently than those other nations. Our God maintains a relationship with us. He will hold us accountable, but he will also be accountable. If we find ourselves out of favor with God, we have only to reestablish our relationship, and he will be there to welcome us. So is it true? Does hope spring eternal? I think it is innate. I think it is unavoidable. I think it is inescapable. Generations who have gone before us tell us that when in the course of human events. We, the people. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. Never give in. Never, 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 never. In nothing great or small, large or petty, never give in except to convictions of honor and good sense. Never yield to force. Never yield to the apparently overwhelming might of the enemy. But this I remember, and I have hope. It's the transition that captivates me. Over and over again, in all parts of the Old Testament and in the New Testament as well, in the darkest of times, people don't deny the way things are, but they don't stay there. They remember, and they have hope. After the crucifixion and resurrection, the disciples were feeling pretty low. They weren't quite sure what they should be doing. So what did they do? They remembered. Well, let's go fishing. And soon after that, they saw Jesus, and he told them to try something different. And things changed radically. Maybe having hope is opening ourselves to change, to something different. Wherever we find ourselves on the continuum of despair to faith, let's take stock. This is how things are, but then